the 6th of February everywhere in the world. What are we marking?
International Day of Intolerance. We're not tolerating FGM. And so each year it's about how do we make sure that we're not tolerating it more and more. And we have Alberta Wambua with the Gender Violence Recovery Center. As I mentioned in the intro, I think we met like 20 years ago. And so she's been at this for so long. And so she's here to mark the day, but tell us whether we're shifting towards the right direction. Because as with many development issues, there's a scary pattern where progress and persecution are dancing together, 2 steps forward, 20 back. There's a lot of anti-gender rhetoric as well, kind of like stifling the rights of women and girls. So Alberta, thank you for being here. And I should also ask Alberta a wordist moment. Am I getting her into the wordist? Yes. Alberta, what I'll do is, and usually Eric throws this one at me, but we normally like we normally like to just kind of give some words and quotes that have been said, and I'll give you a hint as to the person who said this. So the hint is, and we've given it at the top of each hour, a very big politician, political leader in our time, has been for several years actually, and he has a name that is linked to sort of like ushering us into a new era in the 60s, post-independent. And this is the quote: "The problem with this country is that everyone wants to be a politician, but nobody wants to work." Who said that?
Does it come with money? Then I'll think faster.
Does it come with money?
Yeah, there'll be money.
That's a great one.
He likes to wear red ties. His name has been mentioned a lot over the last few weeks, even in line with everything that's happening in DRC Congo.
A Kenyan politician.
A Kenyan politician. Okay, former president of the country.
Uhuru Kenyatta.
Yes. Habai tie, he used to. That's
because
I mean,
the shirts and the African attire.
The red ties.
The matching red ties.
Oh, yeah,
matching red ties.
So now he's the one who said that. But Alberta, we are marking a very critical day today. Maybe you can set the tone for us. Why is this day so important? What are we looking at in terms of where we are with the fight against FGM?
Thank you for having me. So today, as you rightfully said, marks the International Day of Zero Tolerance to Female Genital Mutilation. It's very important, as Latif mentioned earlier, it's marked globally. And the idea is to just that, end female genital mutilation. Earlier, when you're asking whether we are making headways, yes, we are. In 2022, the prevalence for a female genital mutilation was at 14.8%. And that's according to the Kenya Demographic Health Survey. And previously, it was at 27.1%, that is 2008, 2009, and 32.2% in 2003. Why this is important in ending female genital mutilation, then it helps us realize, development even in Kenya, and even just achieving the 3 Sustainable Development Goals, 3, 4, and 5, one on quality health, both physical and mental, the other one on gender equality, and the other one for being on education. So today, as we mark this in Kenya, it's being marked in Meru County. And why Meru County? Because it's one of the 22 hotspots areas in Kenya. In this last KDHS, Kenya Demographic Health Survey, it was actually at 18.8%. Yet you find, and that also then answers why it's important to continue working towards this and creating movements, both at survivor-led and youth-led and, the government and every player in it, is because the Nigerian JK actually signed a declaration to end female genital mutilation and that's the Meru elders, in 1956. But you can see still one of the hotspots. So there are many reasons that don't make sense that female genital mutilation, is practiced. And there are many emerging trends around it. So when you're saying we're making steps, yet we could still make the steps back, because then you'd expect being harmful traditional practice, we just say today, imeisha, and we stop at it. So there are reasons that don't make sense, actually. It's because then you want to control the autonomy, the body of women, the sexuality of women, the power and control issues that don't make sense, but also have a lot of negative manifestations, both physically and health-wise, that also affect the development of Kenya as a country.
How do we interrogate the causes that entrench like FGM into our culture, because I think that's where we start from, right? It's the why are we doing this, and then we move there, because coming to someone and telling them this is a harmful practice, they'll tell you it's been done, it will continue being done, I'm not listening to you, right? So how do we interrogate where we're coming from, as you know, from a culture perspective, and then now use that to shift the narrative? I think we're all resistant to change in one way or the other. Like you said, from the 1950s, if the Nigerian check, it was like, okay, cool, we'll end female genital mutilation, but over 60 years later, nothing has happened. So then how do we get to the root cause and the culture question and changing that mindset? I know it's a very difficult question, but if you could attempt maybe to give us an overlook.
Yes. So it's the why, and as you rightfully say, people say, yeah, it's the culture, it's the social norms, it's what my parents and my grandparents did.
Right.
But we don't, as you rightfully say, interrogate the why. So how do we do this? Is to make people even understand what is female genital mutilation. It's removing of the external organs and all that. Getting deeper and showing, and not just the women and girls, but everyone else.
Right.
What are the side effects, or what are the manifestations, so to say? So what really happens? Psychological, very few people pay attention to that in Kenya, yet it's so important, mental health. Physically, the tools that are used that are not even being sterilized. You can get HIV infection, you can get tetanus, there are birth delivery issues, you know, because some of them are stitched up, and the cutting, the all those things. I have met ladies who've actually gotten, and girls who've actually gotten disabilities from female genital mutilation. Yeah, so I'll give you an example of one. She was from Tana, and she went through the cut. When was it? When she was about 3 or 4 years in the forest. They taken to the forest. Young girl, you're away from your parents, and these young women would hold your feet. So as they're holding her legs and she was being circumcised, one of her legs broke. So I thought she's just crying for the sake of crying. So after the circumcision, they wrap up your legs, you know. So she did not heal properly, and she actually got disability from that. So making people understand what are these negative things, because there's no, you know, culturally, they would say this is to enhance the purity of a woman, to, you know, modesty, and also for you, it's like a rite of passage for you to be married. So if you're not circumcised, then you're not married. Then from that, you also need to empower the community, sensitize that community to understand. Because what happens, the same community discriminates. So I've met a girl who did not go through you managed to, you know, escape, in quotes, the female genital mutilation. So she managed to go to school, she managed to, you know, educate herself. But when she would go home for the holidays, the other girls don't want to go with her, you know, to the river to fetch water, Nimchafu. She managed to get married, and at the point where she was in labor, and the husband was not there, her aunties circumcised her in labor at home before they took her to hospital, because then if she gave birth, the child would be a taboo baby. So then that's how it comes to, how do you sensitize this whole community? Then again, the cutters, not sure how they're called, those ladies who actually do the circumcision, that's the economic source of money, or source of, you know, survival. So how do you get them then alternative sources of survival? You have the gatekeepers. I spoke about the Nigerian JK. That's recently, just I think last year, the Sabauti elders also signed into a declaration to end female genital mutilation. So making them also understand, because it's a patriarchal society. It's the men who are still controlling, you know, the social norms, so to speak. So making them understand how negative this is, you know, and how you need equal players in the playing field, you know, to be able to achieve. So show them what is the product? I mean, what is the gains of having this? So even the government, the amount of money they lose, you know, in terms of health complications and providing medical treatment, including organizations like ourselves. And then again, having the survivors-led, as the anti-female FGM body is doing, and youth-led, and, you know, the law enforcers also then being able to enforce the law.
I want to ask a couple of questions, you know, just trying to understand the why, right? So over 60 years, the elders of the Meru have said, end FGM. Now, Meru, we've got to understand, is many sub-tribes.
Yes.
But overall, there's something. Now, Meru people, we're just using Meru as an example because,
Yes, please.
the event is taking place today in Meru,
Yes.
and we've said there's high prevalence of FGM in Meru, which stands at 18.8%, you said.
Yes.
Okay. How do we juxtapose that with the levels of exposure of the society, the economic exposure as well of the society? I'm looking at the Meru County Government website, meru.go.ke from the Department of Education, and literacy rates as at 2012, the county rate of literacy stood at 53%, with 40% being male, 60% being female, right? So even at the literacy level, more women are educated than men. And then we look at the number of boys and girls being enrolled. There are more female learners than male, as the enrollment is 345 male compared to 565 for female. That is combined. Even in high school, in secondary schools, you've got 29,000 girls in school compared to 25,000 girls in schools. Okay. So if you look at that, you can see that the girl child is exposed, is educated, is therefore we can then extrapolate and say economically empowered. The literacy levels, of course, have risen even above this. The literacy levels should be much higher now in Meru. So people are aware, they're educated. Even the girl child is actually being supported to go to school. So I want to ask that question that if we say that the reason why we have such high prevalence of FGM is because of control, these figures start questioning that. Because if it was about control, then you'd be seeing control even in school enrollment. You'd be seeing control even in political involvement. The governor of Meru has been elected overwhelmingly, is a woman. All right? Is one of only 7 governors who are women in this country today.
Yes.
So the women of Meru are empowered.
Yes.
So where's the control bit coming in?
The custodians of culture. So you can be, and I'll tie this up also to FGM is, female genital mutilation is a form of gender-based violence. I have met a lady who works at the UN who all have 5 girls who are actually raped by the husband. So you see, she has the money, she has the exposure, she has the, so it's again the custodians of culture. Who is it? It's the men. And then also the value that we have tied to, would I say, marriage. So you can be, you've gone to school, you have all this education, but this man is not going to marry you. And that's what has happened also with the Maasais and Morans. He's not going to marry you because you're not circumcised. So you're not circumcised, so you're not marriage material, you are not...
You're impure.
You're loose, you're impure, you're, what do they say? You're going to be promiscuous because you're not married. I mean, you're not circumcised. So those are some of the reasons.
Is this assumed, or is it actual? Is it anecdotal, or is it from actual, research where we went and surveyed and asked people and they said this? I'm asking that because if over the last 60 years we are seeing more and more Meru women getting empowered, if over the last 60 years we're also seeing more and more Meru men getting exposed to education, getting exposed to information about FGM, if the elders are still saying, well, for us, FGM is this. So when we come back and say, it's because they will not be marriageable, when the mother and the father of an 8-year-old girl today in Meru are making a decision for FGM,
nobody wants to be ostracized from culture.
So that's one. Two,
Yeah.
the FGM has also changed in form of trends. So for example, it's at a younger age. Exactly what you're saying, the 8-year-old who does not have, what would I say?
agency,
The agency, yes?
power to choose.
The power to choose. So it's your
Yes.
parents choosing for you.
Yes.
So that is one. Two, the response, would I say, mechanism. This one's of if one person is circumcised, there is a law. But then again, that's another whole discussion. It's why is it not being implemented, Because then the people who are circumcising you are within your family members. Who are you going to report to? So there are response mechanisms around that. Again, this child has no, what would I say, agency.
Right.
So it's this parents deciding for you, so to speak. There's another
And
point
very
I
likely,
really-
the parent underwent the cut.
Yes, the parents underwent the cut, and they don't know any better.
I would say, is it possible to separate? Because we can separate economic development and education and culture. We live in a world where people go to school, and when it's time to get married, what's the first thing you do? A traditional ceremony, right? Yeah. We're trying to mix, match, blend, So as education levels rise across the country, as literacy rises, it doesn't mean then that culture automatically
is dying.
Takes a back seat.
And can I also say, so I know you're about to give a statistic, but there's we need to remember that custodians of culture, that also comes with power.
Yes.
Again, I mentioned earlier an anti-gender movement. It sounds very over the top and radical, but it's there. People don't like to give handover power. Who will hand over power?
Right.
So I think there's ways in which you're able to manipulate trends and social norms to still maintain and inculcate power. Because as long as you're the custodian and you're the man, you call the shots, right? In terms of how people perceive you. And so we have to remember that things like FGM, which in as much as, and Alberta will confirm, in as much as there's been actions to make the numbers less, you're still seeing them on the rise. Child marriage, I think recently we found a country. What country was it? Was it Iran? I'm going to try and remember. Just legalized child marriage.
I think
they just legalized it.
Or something.
I was talking to Mariam and Eric yesterday and talking about how last year there was a politician in Florida in the US who wanted to make it illegal or something that can get you into trouble if you talk about your periods over break time. All of this speaks to a push to kind of reduce the girl or woman or stifle her. Even though on the other spectrum, there's a lot of push to amplify women's voices. But that's why I said it's dancing very delicately with persecution. And I think FGM being on the rise, even in households where you would expect them to know better, to understand better, to be proud of the knowledge that I want my daughter to go to school, I don't want her to be circumcised. But it's happening in mansions. And I think we need to be cognizant of that. We need to be cognizant of the fact that, yes, Eric raises some very legit questions. There's somebody listening saying, if it's still going on, it means people don't have a problem with it. It's gender-based violence. Violence is on the rise as a way to really reduce the woman's role in society. It all circles back. I don't know whether that was a statement or a question, but that's kind of the context that we need to think about.
I totally agree. Again, it's also been medicalized. So as opposed to, as much as we're saying, why hasn't it stopped? It's also then changed the form. So medicalized means you're getting medics to actually go and perform the female genital mutilation in their homes. Because now you don't want girls bleeding excessively, for example, in the forest and dying, and then you have a case on your hands. So that's also partly what has also happened. Yes.
There's also a case for people who say it's a rite of passage. And then you say, okay, can we have alternatives? Does it have to be this, right? Are there ways of sensitizing communities? Is there work that is being done to make sure that people still feel that graduation from I am no longer just a toddler, a child, I'm now an adolescent, I am now going into manhood, womanhood, etc., that don't involve female genital mutilation?
Yes, the alternative rites of passage, organized by religious leaders, but also organized by different community players. So that's there. Now, one thing I would like to mention is that even the male circumcision that you've mentioned, sometimes
because if we're
pushes for female genital mutilation. I'll tell you how. In Baringo, there are ladies who, because they've not gone through the cut, cannot cook for their circumcised sons during circumcision, which is such a big deal. So what do? They would go back and get circumcised.
Right. So is it okay then to also interrogate male circumcision and say, is this something that needs to be happening? Do we open up the room for that? Because with the same question of agency that we're talking about, that girls lack agency and absolutely should not be the case, then can we also say that boys lack agency when they're going into the forest or the hospital, etc., for circumcision? As much as there's a medical element, but it's like, okay, there's people all over the world who aren't circumcised and they're doing just fine. Do we then open up, that conversation?
That one I leave for Latin. But the comment I'm making.
Yeah, and I think Mariam is asking questions that people would be asking.
Exactly. So one of the things, it was actually discussed on Tuesday at the National task force for femicide, against femicide and gender-based violence, was also what's inculcated in the minds of men and the boys when they are being circumcised. So that aggression around it, when do you mwanaume, when do you kusema, sawa. But there's also this
mama yako sasa, you can't, ideally you should not be.
Yes, but there's that other a form of respect and partnership that you need for this, the woman around you and the girl. And that's why then again, as you say, the control issues and things around that. So after some of those rites of passage, as you see, some of the male circumcision that we need to ask, there are places where immediately after the circumcision, they're now off. You can go and sleep with any girl you meet on the road, and things like that. So those are also then areas that also need to be addressed.
All right. It's a very tricky thing. I think one thing we can agree on is we need to have zero tolerance against FGM, right? The how we get there then becomes the question. The culture shift is difficult because people will push back with X and Y and Z, but are there things that you have seen to be tried and tested and to move the needle, especially in these hotspots, whether it's your Tanas, it's your Merus, then that we can maybe try and replicate elsewhere, and even in those areas push and get those rates down to zero?
So there's good work that has been going on, just even looking at the KDHS and how it's reduced from the percentages in 2008 to to now in 2022 KDHS. That's a big step to it. So one is religious leaders have also been very key. There are certain religions or faiths that people then believe it's within the religion, within the teachings of that religion. Then you have leaders who come and interrogate it and actually say, no, it's not. The other thing that we need to do, and we need to face it as is there's a certain sect in Kenya, around the political season, they will circumcise even their mothers. Yeah, it happened in 2007, 2008, and a bit even after. There are certain counties where we don't mention it, we don't talk about it as much, but circumcision still helps. Still happens. Yeah. About 2 years ago, I think there was a slum in Kiambu where it was happening. So there are some forms of, what would I say, sects or so that then will have, will circumcise the girls. Good things that have happened, again, the community sensitization. The people who, and what would I say, the reformed cutters, or so to speak, they've come out and said this is not right. Getting the men on board, that has also been very key. Spoke earlier about the Morans, who'd say, I'm not going to marry a girl who's not circumcised, for example. That has also helped. Under the Accelerate program, so this is funded by the Embassy of Denmark in Kenya, implemented by PS Kenya, GVRC, and PSI, Population Services Kenya and Population Services International, GVRC. What we've done is we've set up also, GBVRC centers. So this would be gender-based violence medical centers, right, where girls are also then, they come and they get corrective surgeries or they get treatment after getting, circumcised. Again, there are community programs that have happened. There are schools that have turned into rescue centers by default. So these are schools that are in certain areas like Kajiado, West Pokot, Samburu. And these schools, during holidays and around that circumcision time, they're not going to let the girls go home. And every day they'll do a roll call and follow up. Is Alberta in school, just to make sure then that, because when they go home, they're going to be circumcised and that's it. Right. So they'll do that extra mile, they'll go that extra mile to follow through, with the child, and transition levels have actually been better. And even sponsor education for those children, because in this particular family, I would rather circumcise my girl, get her married off, I get my dowry. So it's making me rich, as opposed to her going to school. Yeah. And I met community and people who would say, why educate Janet, because she's going to be married off anyway, and Malit and Oko Kwingine, and things like that. So these centers have actually acted as rescue centers. They also shelter programs. We are now supporting 16 shelters across the country, and the idea is to have protection centers for these girls. So you're protecting them not just because they've been circumcised, but you're also protecting them so that they are not circumcised. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's take a break. This conversation continues. Today is the International Day of Zero Tolerance for FGM, and our guest is Alberta Wambua, Executive Director of the Gender Violence Recovery Center. She'll tell us more about what they do at the Recovery Center. So, the statistics that you've given us, just the latest ones from the Kenya Demographic and Health Survey of 2022, 14.8% prevalence of FGM in the country, all right? And we're asking ourselves, so many years of talking against FGM, we still have this kind of prevalence rates. How do we fix it? That's a conversation that we'll be having. Thank you for everybody who's also sharing their comments and views on X, on TikTok, on YouTube. We'll be reading some of them. And at some point, we'll open the phone line just to hear from people. What do you think we need to do to fix this issue once and for all? Fixing the nation, one conversation at a time.
Hey, yo, what's up? This is Oponyakolo Eugene from Riara Gardens, and I'm here just wondering, and I have questions in my mind. You can see the government led by President Ruto is forming their own team for 2027 elections. You can see the opposition led by Kalonzo Musyoka, Rigathi Gachagua, and Eugene Wamalwa. They are forming their team. Which team are we forming as young people? Where are we as youth? Yet this country is composed of 70% of the young people. Where are we?
Good morning. Wake up, wake up.
Yeah.
Chugai, Kivua Meru, hapa hivi. Tuko na deals, tuko huku Maua Massives, you know, Meru of course. Tuko juu miti, tunajituma, fixing the nation. Sini watu wa stima, sinaget, tunekea watu wa Maua stima.
I'm Lazo from Kikuyu. I believe fixing the nation requires inclusiveness and identity, and I'm speaking on behalf of the street families, street youth who are most of the times denied access to ID cards by chiefs and the register of persons. So can the government fix this issue by allowing the chiefs and the register of persons to give ID cards to the street families?
You know, I completely agree on that issue of IDs, all right? And, I mean, it's very discriminatory. I do not understand why we need to apply for IDs.
Especially
I don't see
after
it.
a birth certificate. I mean, it should just flow.
It should be an automatic thing. Yes.
To be fair, it does say a birth certificate is not proof of Kenyan citizen. It's right there on the document. They give you the disclaimer. They tell you this document is not proof.
So both
of
are important.
citizenship. I think so.
Look,
but the vetting is what
a
I think
birth
apply.
certificate will be proof because that's how a child is going to get capitation in school. Because at that point, the child it will bring it up.
We'll come back.
We will raise
Plus
it.
the birth cert has both parents.
Yes, it has
does.
everything.
It
and
does.
it's how you register citizens in Kenya.
But
You
this-
become a citizen of the Republic of Kenya by birth.
By birth.
There's a reason why that
there's registration.
disclaimer is there, but we'll get back to it.
Tutaingia
That
hapo.
disclaimer for it's
Tutai-
not proof of citizenship.
Tutaingia hapo. Alberta, thank you very much for joining us. So how do we actually get people to contribute to WhatsApp Nation?
Right, so you send us the video. Mariam and Eric had to remind me that it's not in portrait format.
It is
landscape. That's what you do. Your name, where you're from, and what's up, what's going on around you, what do you feel needs to be fixed, what do you just want to celebrate? We'd love to know. The number should be on the screen, 0112 500 400.
There we go.
0112 500 400. We'd love to hear from you. Just spam our line, WhatsApp Nation, so that we can always share it every day and find out where you're bringing it in from. We are having a conversation on zero tolerance for FGM, February 6th. Each year, we mark this day. Comments on YouTube. Jess, I'm justified. Alberta has been doing this for quite some time. Good to see her and the GVRC team still going strong. Star Kenya says Mariam is switched on and understands human nature and the challenges. So what we are talking about, yes, Mariam and Kabisa. Mariam, take the shout out.
Thank you. Thank you, Star Kenya.
In as much as we talk about ending FGM, pushing back on gender-based violence, increasing access to reproductive health and rights, you know, and Mariam had asked questions earlier just in terms of what are some of the success stories. Eric raises a point that many may not want to debate because at the end of the day, we know that FGM is violence. We know that girls and women, their life is really reduced to a version which is not to their potential. It's wrong in that sense. But he's saying, okay, so is it the approach? Is it the approach that we're getting wrong when it comes to mobilizing support to push back on all forms of violence against women and girls? That's where you were coming from.
Yes, and I'm looking at it from how many years have I had this conversation about FGM? I mean, it's been more than 2 decades, right? And for how long has the government actually taken in the reins of fighting FGM? It's been more than 15 years, true? You had, what's that body that was led by Linda J.B. Kalimo?
The Anti-Female Genital Mutilation Board.
Government, right? We even have laws that say this. We have had very many NGOs that have been working in this sector for all these years, just campaigning and pushing against FGM. And yet, we still have such a high prevalence rate of FGM in this country. Now, look, over those 20 years, people who were in school 20 years ago, let's say people who were teenagers, let's say somebody who was 18, 20 years ago, is how old today?
Oh, it's 38, yeah.
38.
Okay. And that is a parent. People who are parents today of the majority of the population are aged in their 40s. And they are the parents of the Gen Alpha and some Gen Zs.
Right.
Those above the 50s are the parents of even the millennials.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's where our bulk of our population is. Those parents are all exposed to this information about FGM, presumably because NGOs have been going to those communities where there's high prevalence rate, because the government through chiefs has been going to push against FGM. The children who are now no longer children at 35, 36, 37, 38 are having their own children, they are likely to continue practicing FGM. What's wrong?
Alberta,
You can't say it's because of lack of information, lack of understanding, it's been communicated over and over.
I want to give you a chance, but I also want to ask what intentions, what do we want for the people of Kenya and for girls and women? Why am I saying this? Sometimes I think it's a prioritization of what we feel is important. The fight against, for example, gender-based violence, in the same way that Eric has described all the campaigns, right. There often seems to be a deprioritization of some of these issues. He has spoken to, but it's so loud, it's amplified. This day is marked. There's things happening in Meru, things happening everywhere. Sometimes it really speaks to the social norms. How do we view the women and girls, and what do they deserve access to? You can pour as much money as you want to into the policies and into the programs, as long as your lens still tells you that this person has a certain place in society, in the kitchen. And again, that's no hate to the choices that people have. But I feel like as long as your lens says something, the issue will persist because you're not convinced that they deserve better. I often think that's where it stems from. Right. Before you sleep and you think this person doesn't deserve the same rights, it permeates through everything: policy, conversation, media, misinformation, social patterns. It stems from my lens and how I view you. I could be simplifying it, but what are your thoughts?
I totally agree.
Asked?
So you start with the motive and intention, exactly what you're saying. For the longest, the Ministry of Gender has no CS. Exactly what you're saying, the importance. When you look at the allocation of resources year in, year out, including that anti-FGM board, it's really struggling. It's not a priority. Under the national government, it's not a priority, and the county government. And going back to you, Latif, asking, what's the issue? It's talk and not action. So let's go to those same parents you're saying they were in school, and now their parents and now their kids are being taken through the circumcision. We never had discussions around female genital mutilation. We knew it was there, but it's not. I don't think it's in the curriculum. It's not. Maybe they're trying to put it into there. It's not in the curriculum, for example. We have an issue with even comprehensive sex education. And that's why not having these candid conversations as is how you're having the HIV prevalence going on, is how you have, for example, the onset of HIV infections, of even sexual activities in Endachini, and we're not having those conversations. This thing of we can't give children, what is it called, contraceptives and all that, all these discussions. So that's where the problem is. I'll give you an example. In a few years back, very few, there's a certain wife of a certain governor from our county. That's, the FGM prevalence is really high. And she came to where we work and said, there are all these doctors, surgeons who are willing to come from the US, would like you to offer your hospital so that then we can have reconstructive surgeries for women and girls who've undergone female genital mutilation. Said, fine, we'll do that. We'll offer the hospital, they'll come with the expertise, let's all contribute. So we told her, we need you to go back to your community and create awareness about this, camp and these operations, and camp. She said, I can't do it. My husband will lose votes. So when you ask that these women have been educated, people are in the forefront, there are many issues that come into play for gender equality to happen. And exactly what also Janet is speaking about. We can say women educated, entry levels into university is good, all that. But what is happening? It's seen as a fight between men and boys. So a lot of conversations now, whatever effort you make, you'd hear, oh, so what about the boy child? We're not fighting. We're just saying, can we just be in this space? Yes, we have different strengths, but have these equal opportunities, so to speak. So it's deeper than why is female genital mutilation not stopping? I spoke about a certain sect, for example, and you may see it when the elections, and anytime you're having, for example, conflict in the elections, there'll be circumcision for women and girls, just to put you, quotes and quotes, in your place, you know, to be able to control you. You talk about affirmative action. So yes, you're going to have the female leaders so that then you have the voice for yourself. But what happens? Then they're not given resources. Or if they're given resources, then the resources, I'll give you another example. So I won't say the agency, but a national agency has all these resources to set up shelters. So they're set up, many of them in counties. But what happens?
One is this? It's taxpayer funded, you've got to mention it.
NGAF.
Okay. The
So
National Government Affirmative
Action Fund. So they'll set up this. But when they go to the counties, these shelters are supposed to be operational. Who's supposed to support them? The county government gives, what is it called? Gives personnel. It's supposed to give resources, food, and everything else for them to happen. So a couple of them are elephants, you know, projects. They're not happening. So what happens? These same NGOs you talk about, we are doing then work that's not our work. It's the government work, and goes back to what Janet was saying, that political will, and saying, being true to what you say and what you act. Because if it's laws, there's the anti-FGM Act that's in place. If it's medicalization, why are the doctors? They should be held accountable. Why are you going to someone's house to, you know, if it's the parents? Right. So the perpetrators of gender-based violence, and specifically female genital mutilation, are the people around you. Agreed. Where I work, the perpetrators around non-perpetrators, the survivors, 68%, known and mentioned.
Right.
So there are a lot of things that will come into play because I'm dependent on my husband economically. Yeye ndio kusema, he's the custodian of culture. Whether nimeenda shule, sijaenda shule, he'll decide how many children I have, he'll decide whether my daughter will be circumcised. I'll go home and, you know, the grandchildren, the parents. I have gone to a function in Kisii where it was actually on anti-FGM. And there were 5 leaders, strong leaders, from senators to MPs to women rep, and they all came out and said, I have been circumcised. All of them, they're around my age and younger, just to show you that it's real and it's happening, and that's why we're having this conversation.
I wanted to speak to something
Let me
Eric
just finish
said
a small one.
All right, all right.
So it was a 1-week camp for girls to be able to discuss this plus their parents. This women leader actually raised their own resources to be able to support that. By the time it was noon, electricity was switched off. The police was there to arrest people. We were told we are, what is it called, LGBTQ, because we're in pink T-shirts. It was a girl's color. And that camp was stopped. And the CS then called and said, these girls have to go home and do their homework. The previous day, they'd actually done a poem for the president in the same county discussing female genital mutilation. So that's where the disconnect is.
Right.
But
So
there's progress. There's small progress.
there is so much progress. What you were saying about we've been fighting this 15, 20 years. It's been part of our national agenda, etc. I think sometimes when we're here, we conflate visibility and frequency because we're in a place like this, in Nairobi, first of all, already you are having the anti-FGM conversation, or you're hearing it consistently, right? Has that been as prevalent everywhere across this country, especially in places where it's very rampant? I don't know, I can't speak to that, but I'm very wary of thinking that because I'm here and I hear these conversations and we've been talking about it and I know there's an agenda that everybody knows
everybody gets through.
But then there's also this very dangerous now trend that Janet was telling me about yesterday, which is, the people you quote unquote wouldn't expect, which is people who have the best of education, wealthy. Albertas, yes.
Circumcised.
But people like
I'm joking.
Right? Albertas are now going back to their roots, quote unquote, and circumcising them. When you're fighting this from one end, it's already hard enough. Now, when you have to fight from this other end, it becomes even more difficult. What does this do for the fight against FGM? And or do we leave it to a point where we say now, you're making this decision as a 40-year-old autonomous woman, you're grown, ni sawa.
My body, my choice.
Yes.
Yeah. Alberta, please pin the question Mariam has asked. I just want to read a statement, but please, that's a very critical question in terms of how do we approach it. Right. Daniel Njaga on X has said something. He says the problem with this approach, or the approach that is used, is that it shifts the blame and the burden to the victims rather than the villains. Integrity, oh, sorry, that was not the integrity. I thought he was talking about this. But in line with shifting the blame and shifting the burden, I think a lot of the time it's a victim almost having to bear the blame. Giselle Pellico's case last year, if I can just step outside, was so powerful because she said, shame must shift sides.
Right.
It has to shift. I can't always be carrying my burden and my shame and then advocating and then amplifying. It's exhausting, it's triggering, but it's also a thing for how do we take this back to, hey, your policies, your budgets need to reflect to these causes. So I just thought I would read that. But yeah, speaking to Mariam's question on just the fact that people who fit this profile are saying, I feel like I'm missing my identity. There's something about, and I'm going to then, and they're bought into it and they end up going back to be circumcised in their 40s or late 30s.
Yeah, so for different reasons. This mentality of modernization and the negativity around it, but also because you get tired of the fighting. Yeah, it's just yesterday morning I was having a conversation with some colleagues in different institutions, and we're asking ourselves very many questions about, yes, as Janet says, we've been in this space like for so many years. Right. Are we making any change? Going back again and then just saying, even if you make, as once my supervisor told me, you make even a change of one person, one survivor, that's enough. You know, you can't change the whole world. And then again, going back to what you're saying, Mariam, is social norms are not changed overnight. These cultural things, you can see Gembe in Meru being one of the hotspots, for example, and yet they signed that declaration in 1956. So sometimes people feel this culture that we are removing, of course, it's the harmful culture. There's positive, good cultural practices that are good. They tend to have a vacuum. So you need to know, so what is it that I'm getting into that vacuum? And in sociology, that ties up with identification and a sense of belonging. Yeah. So how then, what are we filling this vacuum? And that's why then you have alternative rites of passage, for example. So is it it's the good conversations of then how do you become a woman, a menstrual health, for example, tying it up also with female genital mutilation. I was learning in some communities where these young girls, 9-year-old, you're circumcised, you're married. So where do you learn your menstrual hygiene and health from? Right. Your old husband, 70-year-old. Yeah. Okay. Yeah?
Or your mother-in-law.
Or your mother-in-law.
Yeah,
and sometimes
first is a co-wife, so pia kuna issues.
Yeah, the older women in the home that you've gone to then take over that role. I mean, we've seen it many times in these early marriages and how they work. So there's you're brought and you're put in charge or under the watch of either your mother-in-law or auntie-in-law. And in-law is then now the one who's guiding you through it. I want to ask a question and on something that you raised, which is on the power balance and the role that has played, okay? Where this woman feels that she does not have the power to make decisions around the home, that it's somebody else, the husband, who's making the decision, or the men in the society who are making the decision on what happens, whether our daughters are going to be circumcised, how many children we're going to have, and so on and so forth. And then now I want to bring in the question, at the Gender Violence Recovery Center, you take in girls who are being rescued from FGM, correct?
Yes.
Who brings them?
So the police.
Okay.
That's actually encouraging. Would the police be the highest number?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Interestingly, like last year, we had 3,743 survivors at GVSC, and over 2,700 were actually brought by the police.
Okay. Right.
In the last 3 years, though we've been in existence in 25 years now in March. Right. Reason being, we've also done a lot of training and sensitization for the police for so many years.
Yep.
So again, it takes time, but there are fruits. Okay. So that's one. They're also brought by children's department, gender officers, the schools they go to, because we also have school programs. So we have school programs where we would go and have child protection discussions. We'll have gender-based violence discussions. We create peer clubs called King and Queens clubs. So then you're giving people the space, the safe spaces to discuss the issues, for them to understand, you know, and have a safe space to even report. And the people around them. So we also engage the parents, also engage the schools and all that.
So who reports to the police?
Who reports to the police?
Yeah.
So it will either be the schools, for example. Remember, it's done within the family setting. Or the grassroots leaders. You spoke about grassroots also earlier. You have human rights defenders. You have chiefs.
Yeah.
We have children, by the way, who walk into our facilities.
And they
We're in
say,
8
I'm
centers.
running away from that.
Oh, we have even kids
Now
who walk into our hospitals.
Mothers.
Yes.
You have not mentioned them at any point.
For female genital mutilation.
Yes.
Yes.
Why is it, if this woman is looking at her daughter and feeling, oh my God, I'd like my daughter not to go through FGM, but my husband is the one who's the decision maker in this. But mothers, you have worked for all those years, you've sensitized community, you've sensitized women, and mothers have bought into the idea of anti-FGM. Why are mothers not the ones who are reporting to the police or coming to the GVRCs and bringing and rescuing their daughters? Why are they not saying, mzee anataka kucircumcise your daughter, lakini
Yeah.
Why?
Aren't a lot of them economically?
Yes. Exactly what I've written. Dependent on their husbands.
Yes.
So what we are also doing, so therefore, and itasema mtoto atatoa fees and all that. Nitafukuzwa. In fact, like in Homa Bay, and they're still tying up, okay, not female genital mutilation, but in Homa Bay, for example, if you're a woman and you report, and in a lot of counties, and you report, my husband has been beaten, nitafukuzwa kwa boma. Where will I go with my children? So this economic empowerment, interestingly, is one of the components in resolving and breaking the cycle of violence and gender-based violence. So what's happening with ourselves and a lot of other organizations, we are now incorporating an aspect of economic empowerment in these shelter programs that we have. Other organizations are even doing cash transfers. They're even doing skilling. Just yesterday, we had a conversation with someone who's willing to support over 90 survivors of gender-based violence survivors coming to GVRC every month. You know, skilling, giving them grants,
I hear all that. I want to push
them
back
loans.
a little bit.
It's okay.
So there's this girl, and somebody else has reported to the police that this girl is due to go for FGM.
Yes.
It's not the mother who reported, not the auntie,
Yes.
not the woman who's a neighbor.
Yes.
It's somebody else who reported.
Yes.
Does the mother face any repercussions at that home?
Yes, accomplice.
What happened?
So we get the girl. First, we rescue the girl. We rescue them with the police and with the children's department and all relevant people. We bring them in. We have temporary shelter at GVRC, the shelters we work with.
Yeah.
We have psychological support if they don't need medical support, depending on what they need, and we put them in the shelter so that then they can continue the education, they can be in a safe space and all that. Then we follow up with the police in terms of access to justice. If there is circumcision that has happened, we will document and we'll have our doctor going to court to give that expert testimony in court. So what has the courts done also then to fast track?
I think
the repercussions for the mother is what
for
you're
the
saying.
mother.
Yes.
They'll be arrested. I mean, it's
No.
the police and the investigators.
In the home. Because
Yes.
you said the reason why the mother will not report this case
Yes.
herself to the police is she's fearing the reprisal from her husband.
Yes, and community.
If the child has been taken by the police from her home, okay, does the husband put any blame on the mother?
Yeah, of course they do.
So what happens to the mother?
They'll also be rescued.
No.
If they're
What
not
happens
okay.
to the mother from the husband? Do they lose all those things that you're saying they're going to lose?
Depends, because there's also family mediation. There's a whole process that happens. There's the legal, there's the family mediation. So each case is very,
Are you
would I
are
say,
trying to say we're
unique?
endangering
What I'm saying is
these
that
women?
either way, if we are encouraging rescuing,
Yes.
and there will be networks within the community that will
Yes.
report,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Why is it not that we are able to empower the mothers who do not want their daughters to go through FGM to report through this network?
We are.
Yeah, they are.
Janet.
And some of them do.
They do.
You remember, this has been years
Yes.
of getting through those barriers. So 20 years ago, you wouldn't even have been able to ask that. And I think, again, Eric is asking, I could even see somebody saying, yeah, make it make sense. It's understanding that this thing is so complex and layered, but there have been a lot of advances of even women understanding this is not right for my daughter. I know I can't say it to him. I lose something. So let me try and find a way to reach the networks, social workers, GVRC, to report it. But it's so complex. It's so complex, but there is progress towards it.
Yeah. Including those community structures, like the community health promoters. They're there now, all over, and they're able to go and do public health and sensitization and screening and all that, safe identification. Those, you also have to use the existing structures to be able to get that support, to be able to have them, and we have a GBV manual, national one with them, so they're also a source of reporting. So source of reporting is not single source, and things have to be layered, including those mothers, by the way. Some of them are beaten, but they can't report. Right. And they would come in and say, I fell, or they're coming for antenatal clinics or something. Then you educate and you train the health providers to be able to identify safely what are also these other issues that are around gender-based violence and female genital mutilation.
And there are fathers who save their daughters. We have to
totally agree.
Speak to the,
totally agree.
But like she said, it's not a war against who.
It's not.
It's really about the fact that even these men have begun to internalize and realize, I don't want this for her.
True.
But it will take time for this woman who is still being beaten to leave. I know we have to wind up here.
Even the one who isn't being beaten, who actively thinks it's a great choice for her daughter, she needs to be spoken for too as well, right?
All right.
We're getting back. We're getting out. It's not even getting back.
We have to do another hour, Mariam.
I'm ready for another one.
Alberta Wambua, Executive Director of the Gender Violence Recovery Center. Thank you for joining us today on the International Day of Zero Tolerance for FGM.